In the plantation records of Marion County, Mississippi, dated October 3, 1847, there is a line that should not exist. Not an escape, not a death, not a sale, just a name crossed out, and then another, and another. By sunrise, 9 enslaved men and women were gone. Not missing, not reported runaway, not found dead. They vanished without a single footprint leading away from the plantation. No blood, no broken chains, no alarms raised in the night. The overseer wrote only 4 words in the margin. Removed per instruction. Instruction from whom was never recorded. The plantation was called Bellmare, an isolated cotton estate surrounded by cypress swamp and red clay hills. Locals said sound died there, that even birds avoided the land after dusk. And yet, people were still taken from their quarters at night. Witnesses later said the disappearances were quiet. No screams, no pursuit, just doors opening and empty beds by morning. When slave catchers were sent, they found nothing. When dogs were brought, they refused to track. When preachers came, they prayed quickly and left before dark. Within 6 years, over 60 enslaved people disappeared from Bellmare Plantation. None were ever listed as escaped. What investigators would later uncover was not a crime of profit, but a system of controlled erasure, hidden beneath sermons, ledgers, and scripture. And Bellmare was only the beginning. Bellmare was founded in 1819 by Ezekiel Hawthorne, a man described in letters as deeply religious and obsessed with order. He did not whip often. He did not drink. He did not gamble. Instead, he built something far more enduring. The plantation was structured like a parish. Bells marked the hours. Work began and ended with prayer. Enslaved children were taught hymns before they learned field work. But Bellmare had rules that didn't exist elsewhere. No one was allowed beyond the North Grove. No one spoke after evening prayer. And once a month, names were called after midnight, not during daylight roll. Those selected were told they were being relocated for salvation. They never returned. Strangely, Bellmare's output never declined. Cotton quotas were always met. Labor shortages were never reported. New enslaved people arrived regularly, but records show fewer purchases than losses. Something was replacing them. Church documents uncovered decades later reveal that Bellmare functioned as a correctional plantation, an experimental moral institution supported quietly by regional clergy. Its purpose was not labor. It was removal. Men and women deemed disruptive, curious, or too aware were transferred into a system that left no survivors and no witnesses. And it was all justified by scripture. Hidden beneath Bellmare's northern cotton rows was a structure never marked on any map. A stone chapel, subterranean, windowless, and soundproofed by earth. Local legend called it the lower sanctuary. It was here that those taken at night were brought, not to be punished, but to be unmade. Testimony from a single escaped gravedigger in 1854 describes benches bolted to the floor, iron rings set into stone, and walls etched with scripture, over and over, until the words lost meaning. Not prayers of mercy, but obedience. Subjects were kept for weeks, sometimes months. Forced fasting, continuous sermon recitation, sleep deprivation framed as purification. Names were stripped first, then speech, then memory. When investigators later uncovered burial pits near the chapel, they found no bodies. Only discarded clothing, folded carefully. Records suggest many were not killed, but transferred elsewhere. To orphanages, seminaries, workhouses run by the same church network. They were reborn without pasts, without families, without proof they ever existed. Bellmare was not hiding deaths. It was hiding people. The nearby town of Crosshaven knew something was wrong. They heard the bells at night. They saw wagons without markings. They noticed familiar faces vanish. But Crosshaven thrived. New schools opened. Churches expanded. Orphanages received steady funding. Every institution tied back to Bellmare's donors. When a federal census taker questioned population discrepancies in 1860, he was escorted out of town before sunset. His final report contains a single handwritten note. This place does not lose people. It repurposes them. After the Civil War, Bellmare Plantation officially closed. But the disappearances didn't stop. They simply changed names. In 1872, 5 years after Bellmare officially shut its gates, a brick orphanage opened 40 miles north, outside Jackson. It was called St. Eloan's Home for Wayward Youth. There was only one problem. No parents ever surrendered children there. No court records ordered placements. No death notices listed dependents transferred. And yet, St. Aloans stayed full. Church ledgers described the children as received by Providence. County records listed them as unclaimed. Investigators later noticed something chilling. Many children arrived between the ages of 12 and 20. Too old to be orphans, too young to resist. They spoke little. They avoided eye contact. They did not know their surnames. And when asked where they came from, most gave the same answer. I was sent after the bells. Night bells. St. Aloans was not an orphanage. It was a continuation site, a place where erased people were reshaped into compliant labor, domestic workers, or clergy assistants. No child was allowed to leave with a memory intact. At St. Aloans, education followed a peculiar pattern. No history, no geography, no lessons about family. Instead, children memorized scripture fragments stripped of context. They learned hymns with verses removed. They practiced writing, but only copying approved texts. Names were assigned, not chosen. Every child received a new birthday the day they arrived. Punishment was never physical. It was isolation. Children who asked about the past were placed in white rooms where silence was enforced for days. Some came out speaking less. Others never spoke again. Doctors later reviewing medical notes found references to guided forgetting, a process refined at Bellmare. By the age of 18, most residents were transferred again, this time to farms, seminaries, or households connected to the same religious consortium. They blended into society. No paper trail followed them. They were living ghosts. In 1891, something unprecedented happened. A young woman working as a laundress in Vicksburg collapsed during church service. While unconscious, she repeated a phrase over and over. They rang the bell for me. Her name was Margaret Rowe. At least, that was the name given to her. Under questioning, she described cotton fields she'd never officially worked. A chapel underground. A man reading scripture without looking at the page. Doctors dismissed it as hysteria. But one physician, Dr. Lionel Brooks, recorded something unusual. Margaret knew hymns no longer used. She recited sermons never printed. She drew a map of a place she should not have remembered. Bellmare. Her memories were breaking through. Dr. Brooks began tracing St. Aloans' funding. Every road led back to the same names, families who once owned Bellmare. He submitted a report to state authorities in 1893. It vanished. Weeks later, Brooks lost his medical license. His clinic burned. His papers were confiscated for review. Margaret Rowe was transferred to a private religious hospital. She died there 6 months later. Cause of death: exhaustion. But Brooks had mailed copies of his notes to a colleague before everything collapsed. Those notes would resurface decades later, after another disappearance, in another town, tied to another institution with the same quiet bells. Bellmare was gone, but its system was alive. By 1905, at least 6 seminaries across Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia shared an identical curriculum. Same hymn numbers, same disciplinary language, same architectural feature: a small, windowless room near the altar. Officially, these were spaces for private prayer. Students called them rooms of correction. Church records revealed something unsettling. A disproportionate number of seminarians had no documented family history prior to age 15. They arrived with clean records and no past. When questioned decades later, surviving clergy described a process called spiritual reset. Candidates deemed obedient were advanced. Those who questioned doctrine were reassigned or vanished from rosters entirely. Their names removed. Their existence denied. The Bellmare method had found holy ground. Former maintenance staff at St. Calvar's Seminary described a ritual performed once a year. At midnight, the bells rang, not in celebration, but in sequence. Names were read aloud. Selected individuals stepped forward. No explanation was given. They were escorted to wagons bearing no insignia. No one ever spoke of them again. Records listed them as called to higher service. But no service followed. What investigators later uncovered was a network of reassignment sites, isolated farms, church-owned hospitals, and labor camps where identity was further dissolved. Some were worked until death. Others were conditioned and redistributed again. The system was efficient, quiet, self-sustaining. In 1917, a fire damaged the basement of a closed church in Natchez. Among the debris was a ledger bound in black cloth. Inside were columns that matched Bellmare's early records. Names, dates, locations, and a final column labeled simply, status. Many entries read, complete. Investigators struggled to define what that meant. No deaths recorded. No burials. No next of kin. Just completion. The last page contained a sentence written repeatedly in different hands. To remember is to resist. By 1923, federal officials quietly acknowledged inconsistencies across census data in multiple southern states. Entire populations appeared to shift without explanation. Communities gained laborers who claimed no origin. Institutions expanded without recruitment. When a joint inquiry was proposed, church leaders intervened. The investigation was reclassified as social misinterpretation. Files sealed for 75 years. The Bellmare system was never dismantled. It was absorbed, renamed, hidden in plain sight. In 1931, something the system had never planned for occurred. It wasn't gradual. It wasn't isolated. It happened all at once. Across 3 southern states, former seminary workers, farmhands, and domestic laborers began reporting the same disturbance. Nightmares that were identical in detail. Bells ringing underground. Scripture spoken without breath. Names being taken away. Doctors first blamed economic stress. Then mass hysteria. But the details matched too closely. Some survivors began remembering names they had never spoken aloud before. Others drew maps of places erased from public record. When newspapers attempted to publish these accounts, editors received quiet visits from clergy and civic leaders. Articles were rewritten. Headlines softened. Truth dissolved into local folklore. But memory had already spread. And memory, once returned, could not be undone. On June 14, 1933, in the town of Crosshaven, the same town that once served Bellmare, a church bell rang at noon. It was not scheduled. No funeral. No service. Witnesses reported the sound lasted exactly 9 minutes, one for each of the first disappearances in 1847. By nightfall, crowds gathered outside the abandoned Bellmare grounds for the first time in decades. What they found shocked even the skeptics. The soil had collapsed in places, revealing stonework beneath. A chapel, the lower sanctuary. Its existence could no longer be denied. Authorities moved quickly. They declared the structure a storm cellar. They claimed the etchings were religious graffiti. They dismissed missing records as clerical error. But too many people recognized the hymns carved into stone. Too many remembered the bells. When former St. Aloysius residents stepped forward, their testimonies aligned, despite never meeting. The story was no longer hidden. It was contained. In 1935, the federal government released a brief statement. No evidence of organized wrongdoing has been found. The case was closed. Section 16, what was never investigated. No forensic teams examined the chapel. No graves were officially documented. No institutions were audited. The land was sold to a private trust. Within a year, Bellmare was plowed flat. But locals say the bells still ring, only heard by those who once answered them. And some names still have no records. Bellmare was never meant to be hidden forever. It was designed as a prototype, a controlled environment where people could be removed from history without violence that left evidence. No bodies, no riots, no resistance movements. The system learned quickly. Fear created martyrs. Disappearance created silence. By removing memory instead of life, Bellmare perfected a method of social control that outlived slavery itself. Former plantation owners rebranded as benefactors. Overseers became wardens. Chaplains became administrators. And the people taken? They became workers who never asked where they came from. Bellmare wasn't about race alone. It was about obedience. Anyone who questioned hierarchy, enslaved, poor, orphaned, displaced, could be processed. That was the true horror. The system did not collapse because of justice. It collapsed because it grew too large. By the late 1930s, the Great Migration, labor shortages, and new identity documentation made total erasure harder. People moved. Records overlapped. Memories resurfaced. Too many fragments survived. When World War II began, federal oversight expanded. Churches lost unilateral control over labor and institutions. The Bellmare method became impractical. Not immoral. Impractical. So it was abandoned, not confessed. Investigators in the 1970s reviewing sealed census anomalies found patterns that echoed Bellmare's structure. Institutions with rotating populations. Records without origins. Facilities justified by moral language. No single Bellmare remains, but pieces of the system do. Anywhere identity is stripped for correction. Anywhere silence is framed as virtue. Anywhere obedience replaces memory. Bellmare taught one lesson well. You don't have to kill people to erase them. You just have to make the world forget they existed. In the ruins of St. Aloans, a single document was found sealed in a wall. No names, no dates, just a sentence. They are gone because we said they were. That sentence has never been officially acknowledged. But history is not only what is written. It is also what was removed. And Bellmare was very good at removal.